Hey, I'm Matt Byler, and in this video, I'm going to be teaching you about radio talk sets. So the order of the video will be as follows. I'm going to start off with giving a general overview of what radio talk sets are, and then I'll speak about how to formulate a radio talk set, and conclude by telling you how to best present one on air. So a radio talk set is the point in a radio show or broadcast in which a radio broadcaster is involving themselves in an on-air discussion. You could think of it as a mini educational lesson. Just as a teacher provides their students with information, so too are you, as a radio broadcaster, providing your listeners with some sort of insight or knowledge. So now that you know what it is, how do you formulate a radio broadcast? So there are a few steps. The first step is to figure out what it is that you want to talk about during your radio talk set. I'll come back to some examples or ideas in a second. Once you figure out what it is you want to talk about, it's time to do some research. You could just look up plenty of information. It's good to get some information so that you know what you're talking about on air. You don't want your listeners to be listening to someone who doesn't know exactly what they're talking about, so feel confident in what you're talking about on air. Once you've researched and gotten some information, take down some notes. You don't want to copy word for word what you find. You want to show your personality and let that personality emerge on air. But also, you don't want to be writing down full sentences. When you tell someone a story, you're not reading off of a piece of paper. You're telling them the story from your own point of view. And so too, do you want to tell your listeners your story while you are on air. So just jot down some basic notes so that you can provide your listeners with information based on the outline that you write. So going back to what it is that you could talk about, the content can range from a bunch of different pieces of information. So one route you can take is you could talk about a song that you played on air. So let's say that you are playing the song Mr. Brightside by The Killers, and you want to provide your listeners with some information and background knowledge about the song. So after the song plays, it's time for your talk set, and you tell your listeners that even though the song is pretty upbeat, it's actually about one of the members of The Killers named Brendan Flowers and his heartache after he broke up with one of his ex-girlfriends. And then he wrote this song to speak about his feelings. And he also based the song off of one of David Bowie's songs. So that's some basic information that you could formulate into a radio talk set. Another avenue you could go down is doing something that I like to call This Day in Music History. So that's where you take an event on the day that you're doing a radio broadcast and find some music history related to that day. So let's say you're doing a radio talk set on the 24th of April, and you stumble upon some information that on the 24th of April in 1976, there was the producer of SNL, Lorne Michaels, and he came on camera and said, "Hey Beatles, I'm interested if you want to come on set tonight and sing 3 of your songs, and I'll give you $3,000 for doing it." And 2 of the Beatles members were actually watching that broadcast, and they were like, maybe we should go down and watch and perform as Michaels wanted us to. And they decided not to. They decided to take the night off. But that's a cool history and piece of information that you could provide with your listeners. A third way that you can provide and formulate your radio broadcast is to just talk about some news. Maybe there's an artist who just released a new song or a music video, or there's just some general information that you want to tell your listeners and provide a story for them like I just did for you, and let them know what's going on in the current music world. Before you go on air, rehearse. You want to make sure, like I said before, you're confident while you're on air and your listeners don't get bored as to what you're saying. Also, make sure that you're being articulate. You want to speak correctly. Thirdly, make sure that you're pronouncing band names and the songs or titles of songs correctly. You don't want to go on air and then sound like you don't know what you're talking about. So make sure you're doing the pronunciation check before you go on air. Fourth of all, make sure you're just speaking to your audience member as if they're your friend. And then last of all, just make sure that you are speaking in a way that is professional. So here's my video on radio talk sets. I hope you learned a little bit and you were able to gain some information about radio talk sets. And I think you're ready to do your first talk set and be a pro at it.